Hi, my name is Julie Lawrence, and my presentation today is titled Perfectionism and Development: Concepts, Influences, and Outcomes. So I wanted to give a quick introduction to perfectionism. The definition given by the APA is the tendency to demand of others or oneself an extremely high or even flawless level of performance in excess of what is required by the situation. It is associated with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and other mental health problems. I do think it's important to note that a lot of us are perfectionists to an extent. So I also wanted to highlight maladaptive versus adaptive perfectionism. Maladaptive perfectionism can be driven from a lot of things, but most commonly it's from feeling unworthy, having a fear of failure, feeling undeserving of success, etc. And it's associated with OCD, depression, eating disorders, and anxiety. Adaptive perfectionism, on the other hand, a person with adaptive perfectionism, usually their tendencies are a strength in many situations rather than a weakness. And these individuals enjoy challenges, they work very hard for success and set large, but usually attainable goals. So we do have three types of perfectionists, which was introduced by Hewitt and Fleet in 1991. First, we have a self-oriented perfectionist, and this individual typically has a high standard for themselves. They're pretty self-critical. Their self-worth depends on things being met or goals being met, and they engage in self-punishment if goals are not met. And although this does sound pretty maladaptive, this can lead to motivation in certain situations. We also have other-oriented perfectionism. And this is focused towards other people. So an individual with other-oriented perfectionism usually becomes frustrated with other individuals because they are not meeting their goals. They usually do not also work well with other individuals because they are unable to split tasks because they believe that others cannot do it as well as them. And believe it or not, this type of perfectionism leads to strained relationships. And then lastly, we have socially prescribed perfectionism, and this is actually the most harmful. It's when an individual feels that others have very high expectations for them. They often feel a lot of pressure to meet these expectations. They live for external approval and validation, and they fear disappointing others. So this is Lev Vygotsky, and he proposed a sociocultural approach, and this approach highlights the crucial role of social interaction, language, and culture in a child's development. He very much so stresses the importance that isolation is detrimental, as we can see with Leon's story and his interactions with Dr. Perry. This is true. And I wanted to highlight a few key terms. We have an MKO, or a more knowledgeable other. This is a person, usually a caregiver, who helps a child attain skills. We have scaffolding, which is usually a gradual and structural support by an MKO that allows a child to gain independence. And then we have the ZPD, or zone of proximal development. And this is basically the gap between what a child can do alone and what they can do with an MKO. And it's important here to make tasks achievable but challenging. Here we have Sigmund Freud, and he proposed a psychoanalytic theory, and it seeks to understand how early life experiences, components of one's personality, and unconscious motives shapes an individual's cognitive development and behaviors. He proposed the psychosexual stages of development, which I put over here to your right. And I don't want to go into too much detail just to save time, but I did want to highlight the importance of the anal stage. This is when potty training begins. And if a caregiver has a very strict toilet training routine, a child can grow up to have very perfectionistic standards. They may feel the need for severe control and order. He also introduced the id, ego, and superego. The id is associated with pleasure and gratification, immediate gratification. The superego is somebody's moral standards and values that they've collected throughout life. And then the ego itself is kind of the balancing act between both of these, and it focuses on actuality and reality. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail here just to save time, but I did want to highlight the superego. If an individual has a very severe superego, it is likely that they are going to be a perfectionist and they'll feel a lot of guilt if they break any morals or values. Next here we have objects, relations, theories, and approaches. And this objects relations really focuses on early relationships. It's very important for a kid's emotional and personality development. And this is a psychoanalytic perspective, but it is important to differentiate it from Freud, and that Freud really focused on unconscious drives, while objects relations focuses on a child, are gaining a sense of self through objects. And I don't mean physical objects here, I mean parents and caregivers. Um, One thing I do want to highlight in connection to perfectionism is that if a child has more of a harsh or critical object, like a mother, father, grandmother, caregiver, it is likely that in the future a child will internalize this and also have perfectionistic standards in their future relationships as well, because this has been internalized. Similar with insecure attachment styles, if a parent is preoccupied a lot and a child doesn't get a lot of attention, it would not be uncommon to see a child have a lot of perfectionistic behaviors later in life because they want to gain love and attention from others. Next, we have social learning theory. This was introduced by Bandura, and it focuses on acquiring new behaviors through observation of others. Now, Bandura really stresses the importance of observational learning, but that's not to say that hands-on experience is not important, but modeling does facilitate learning. A few key concepts are observational learning, obviously, positive and negative reinforcement, and vicarious learning. I wanted to quickly highlight observational learning and modeling and its connection to perfectionistic behaviors. If a parent only rewards flawless work and does not reward even effort or an attempt, a child is only going to think that perfect and perfectionistic standards are appropriate, and this can be very detrimental in the future. In addition, social interaction is extremely important. However, if a child feels peer pressure that perfectionism is the only thing that is acceptable, this can be detrimental as well. So next, I wanted to get into a few of my resources that I have. I wanted to start here with an article by Calisano and her colleagues. And this article sought to understand how perfectionistic concerns and perfectionistic strivings influence state anxiety. And perfectionistic concerns, individuals that focus more on this, have a fear of mistakes and have a very critical sense of self, where for perfectionistic strivings are more goal-directed. And it was found that perfectionistic concerns are way more associated with state anxiety than perfectionistic strivings. And perfectionistic strivings were seen to be a lot more adaptive. This next article investigates how self-criticism and self-oriented perfectionists affect goal progression and for a child. Excuse me. So first, I just wanted to look at self-criticism. Individuals who are self-critical are usually very hard on themselves when a goal is not achieved and engage in a lot of negative self-talk, where self-oriented individuals typically just have really high personal expectations. And it was found that self-criticism hinders goal achievement, while self-oriented perfectionism is actually not, it does, excuse me, having high self-oriented perfectionism does not hinder goal achievement. It can actually assist. However, it's important to note that as long as it is not paired with self-criticism. Sorry, it took me a second to get through that. This next article followed a longitudinal study that looked at academic efficacy and achievement and how they contribute to perfectionistic strivings and concerns. The findings here were that academic achievement reinforces adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism, while academic efficacy is only reinforces adaptive perfectionism. And academic efficacy is the belief that one has the ability to do well in academics, and they don't really engage in a lot of self-criticism. Again, it is important to note that this is only true as long as an individual who has high academic efficacy, they do not have a lot of self-criticism. Next here, this article asks the question of how does childhood adversity affect the manifestation of perfectionism later in life? And it mainly looked at three different types of childhood adverse experiences: childhood abuse, childhood dysfunction, and childhood neglect. And it was found that childhood neglect was associated with heightened levels of socially prescribed perfectionism, and these individuals also typically tried to hide their imperfections. childhood dysfunction or family dysfunction. This was not associated with socially prescribed perfectionism, but it was associated with these individuals hiding imperfections. And childhood abuse, that is encompassing emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. These individuals also appear to try to portray themselves to be perfect towards others. So that is similar to family dysfunction. They had very similar outcomes. This next article we have here sought to explain how a parent's perfectionism can be transmitted to a child. Um, And the main findings here were that self-oriented and socially prescribed perfectionistic parents predicted similar patterns in their children. I doubt that many of us find this surprising, but it is important to note. In addition, if children felt that parental love was conditional rather than unconditional, there's a higher likelihood of self-oriented and socially prescribed perfectionism. And one thing this article really highlights and cautions us is to be careful about generational transmission of perfectionism. It also shows concern for conditional parents that only show conditional love rather than unconditional, and also just cautions controlling parental behavior. Fostering independence is really important. This next article we have here questions, what is the relationship between perfectionistic strivings, perfectionistic concerns, and academic success? It was found that perfectionistic concerns or perfectionistic strivings were related to having high standards and a self-oriented perfectionism. And this was found to be more adaptive, where perfectionistic concerns, these individuals showed a lot of doubt, and this was a major contributor to why this was a maladaptive form of perfectionism. And this article really highlights that not all perfectionism is harmful. However, if it is associated with concern or doubt, it likely will be maladaptive. Excuse me. And this last article here just really looks at the highlights, do perfectionists raise their standards after achieving success? The baseline of this article was given by Schaffer, Cooper, and Fairburn, and they stated that this does happen and that perfectionist standards do go up as they continue to achieve goals and attain goals. And what these researchers found was basically the same thing. It is that greater self-oriented perfectionism will lead to more challenging tasks, and self-oriented perfectionists do raise the stakes after goal acquisition. And this article again really highlights the possibility of chronic dissatisfaction for self-oriented perfectionists. If they continue to raise their goals, eventually they're not going to be able to attain, and this is going to lead to dissatisfaction. So here are my references, and this is the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the comments, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.